Hi everyone, I'm Gary Knoll. Once again, we take our cameras around the world in search of answers to major health questions. A really big question is, how did we end up with Gulf War syndrome? What are its implications for the family members who are now saying that they also are suffering from the symptoms, not just the service personnel who were in the Gulf? What does the Pentagon, the Defense Department, the Veterans Administration, what does it know that it's not willing to share with us? We're going to try to find answers to these very perplexing questions. I'm Gary Knoll. Join me now for our continuing exploration of Gulf War syndrome, a deadly legacy. Germs from the Gulf are good travelers, according to members of the medical community who have expressed concern regarding the possibility of infectious microorganisms becoming fastened to equipment and other materials. They cite instances of Navy personnel on aircraft carriers who never set foot on land, but who mysteriously acquired the syndrome subsequent to active duty in the Gulf region. When aircraft returning from overseas service were unloaded in domestic Air Force bases at the conclusion of the war, the contaminated equipment aboard the returning planes may have facilitated the disease's dissemination into the general population. It's estimated that clothing brought back by soldiers may contain infectious microorganisms that can survive for up to 7 years.
These soldiers, myself included, brought this stuff home to their spouses and their children, and they cross-contaminated them. The people that were in charge knew that this was happening. Their documentation proves that they had full and complete knowledge that this was going to happen. They still brought troops through to Tallil Airfield and Jalaba Airfield, which was in the contamination zone downwind from Kamassia and all the other destroyed facilities. They marched them through there a few days after Kamassia was destroyed and put them on C-130s and took them down into Saudi Arabia and immediately retrograded them from there back home. They went into a contaminated area and they took it home to their kids and their wives and their husbands. That is absolutely unconscionable, and something needs to be changed about that. This was policy-driven, not fact-driven. And the people at the highest level of command knew about that, including General Schwarzkopf. General Franks, who was in charge of 7th Corps, knew it too. The documentation proves that as well.
And it has to have been fairly well known before we went over. When I remember very vividly the night I left, they went through all of our bags, making sure that we didn't bring any sand home as souvenirs. They told us we'd go to the brig. They told us we'd be up for captain's mast if they found sand in our things. And if you gave it up now, you were okay. And a lot of us did. A lot of us just wanted to bring a little sand back as a souvenir. Couldn't do it. After I got back, I went to the blood bank to donate blood. I was told, oh, you're a Gulf War vet, you can't donate blood. I said, why? Well, we just got word that you can't. So since 1991, I've been unable to donate blood, and I don't know why. But there's nothing wrong with me. I find that a little disturbing.
It's been estimated that 30% of Gulf War veterans' babies are born with deformities. This is 10 times higher than the number of birth defects one would expect to find in the general population.
Well, now my son was born with a birth defect as a result of the war. Now he's had cleft lip and palate. He's had 3 surgeries. He needs at least 2 more. VA is not covering any of that. They've denied all of our benefits. He has speech therapy. He has tubes in his ears. He's had constant ear infections, so now he has hearing loss in one side. He has no father. He died when he was 2. He was not pleased that we were going to have another baby. Not that he didn't want to have another baby, but he was afraid. He was afraid of what he was exposed to, the shots he was given. I didn't share that concern at that time. I was just thrilled. And then my son was born, and my husband carried the guilt of that child until he died. He carried that guilt with him.
The study that was brought out about last year, that there are no significant abnormalities in babies born to Gulf War vets, The research was so significantly flawed, just from any researcher's point of view. They discounted all the births in civilian hospitals, and they discounted births in other states, that I am really dreadfully afraid to try and conceive and carry a child. I am just looking at my hair and my memory and my skin and things like that. I can't imagine what's happening on the inside of me and what may have happened to that very fragile genetic material that's in the ovaries. It scares me to death to try and think about carrying a child.
We were never warned not to have children, or to wait, or to take precautions due to chemical or exposures or anything of that nature.
My whole family life has changed. I don't have that intimacy anymore with my husband because I have no feelings. I don't play ball anymore with my son because by the time I throw the ball, my muscles and my arms hurt so bad, they get so heavy. So when they say the soldiers are in this for the money, it's not a matter of money. We just want to get well. We want someone to take an interest in us and try and treat us.
Our goal is not to find out what made us sick. Our goal is not to find out who made us sick, and our goal is definitely not to find out who we're going to put in prison for it. That will come. That will come with the help of the media, the help of Congress, the help of the Attorney General's office. That will come. What our goal is our health. We want our health back. We want our family members' health back.
I've had doctors that are sympathetic and want to know more, that have had to be signed out by their higher up, their chief of staff, before they could say anything. They were monitored in what they said. Even had one physician that her husband served over there with us that closed the door after her chief of staff left and said, I want to see everything you have. I want to know what's going on. And when I took it in and left it with her, I took her a stag this high, and I left it with her, the next thing I knew is I had a first sergeant up there going through the CCEP program, and he laughed the next time I saw him. He said, well, I have a feeling you dropped off a package of information to somebody, because we saw a female doctor flying down the hall after the doctor in charge, being very upset and mad that there was a lot of information out there that wasn't being shared with the physicians.
Some would tell you it's all in your head. Others would just, their reaction to it was in such a way that you knew they didn't believe, that there could have been any connection, that you were either making it up or that you were malingering or that it was all psychosomatic.
If I were a soldier, I'd be outraged when they go to a VA facility, they explain the symptoms they have. They're real, they're not imagined, and the VA is so unresponsive. It is really hard to explain that, but there are probably some who have post-traumatic stress disorder. There are probably some within the range of the 700,000 soldiers who were sent, but probably a very minor factor in this.
I don't believe that this is any kind of classic PTSD. In fact, my observations are that the rates for PTSD were very low during the war, and that the actual figures, although we hear so much about stress being a contributing factor, are very low. I think that I'm observing depression, frustration, anger, which I think are normal responses to people having illnesses that they don't understand.
When the recruiter sat on my couch to recruit my son as a member of the United States All-Volunteer Army, he told us that if our son got hurt, wounded, sick, or injured in the service of his country, that they would be taken care of. What we want, what I want as a parent of a veteran, is for the United States government, as per the Department of Defense, to honor the contract that they made with us. Not a handout, not a pension, but to take care of the sick soldier.
The British veterans are in an even more difficult position than American veterans in some ways, because there's no Freedom of Information Act. And currently, British veterans are being told that they cannot have their own vaccination records. So I ask, how can they then possibly expect to receive proper medical attention when vaccination records are always necessary for a doctor to understand exactly what could be causing an illness?
The dilemma of the soldier on active duty is that by coming forward, he risks losing his job, his health care, his family's health care, and his retirement. So you have this great downward pressure for them not to come forward. The problem with that is that we may have soldiers who are not 100% still on active duty concealing their illnesses as a result of their service in the Gulf. Not because they want to conceal it, but because the military won't recognize these illnesses as a result of their service, and that their only option is to be forced out for not being capable of performing their duties.
How extensive is the cover-up? The Regal report essentially accuses the Department of Defense of lying to the American public and condemns it for abandoning the servicemen who were willing to die for their country. Senator Regal referred to the heartlessness and irresponsibility of the military bureaucracy, concluding there is no more serious crime than a cover-up of facts that could facilitate the diagnosis and treatment of sick U.S. veterans.
We need much more candor from the DOD and the VA and the CIA, a lot more candor. And it's gotten to the point now where this may sound a bit harsh, but some heads need to roll. Because I really believe that all three, to various degrees, have participated in a cover-up that has resulted in the bad health of many of our heroes who served there, and has resulted in the death of some of them. And the longer it takes for us to resolve this issue and unravel this puzzle and solve this mystery, the more illnesses we're going to see and the more deaths we're going to see. So we're at that point now where it's almost criminal, the lack of cooperation we've received from various government agencies.
Well, we clearly have a state of denial underway on the part of most of the executive branch. The Pentagon doesn't want to deal with this for a lot of political reasons and military reasons. If they have to admit that they exposed 250,000 of their own troops as a result of bombing these facilities, Desert Storm is no longer this quick, clean win that Colin Powell has tried to make it out to be. Secondly, if they have to admit that the Iraqis actually used these weapons even once, we didn't respond to that. It means deterrence failed. And is that going to embolden a Kim Jong-il in Korea or a Muammar Gaddafi in Libya or some of these other third world lunatics, essentially, that have got these kinds of weapons programs? Yes, it would, no doubt about it. And then there's another aspect of this that I think is really, really very, very corrosive, and that is the money issue. I don't think the federal government wants to spend the money to help these people. I think that's what a lot of this really boils down to. If you have to actually pay out a lot of benefits to these veterans in a very tight budget environment, you're going to increase the deficit. I don't think there's any way of getting around it. Clinton doesn't want to do that. The Republicans don't want to deal with that. And I think that's why Gulf War veterans are continuing to fall through the cracks in that respect. It's a big money issue, and they don't want to deal with it.
Although the Gulf War syndrome sickness issue has been raised time and time again, and has in fact elicited a response from the military, come back in, we will test you again. Nevertheless, there are no answers forthcoming, and in fact, no documentation for the most part. So we're faced with a situation of sick people, now also wives and children, as well as the members of the military themselves, who go in and have blood drawn, wait upon test results coming back, so with the hope that they can finally know what's wrong with them, only to be told that nothing was found. And when they ask for a hard copy of the lab results, it's not forthcoming. These blood tests are taken over and over and over again. What are they doing with all this blood? Where is it? Where are these hard copy test results? Another type of testing that appears to be going on is spinal taps. As one example, a vet who's very ill, with whom I'm familiar and speak quite frequently, has now had 28 spinal taps done and was scheduled for a 29th. what is this about? Why are spinal taps being taken? It obviously is not helping him regarding any sort of evaluation as to what's wrong with him. He continues to worsen. What sort of readings might they be taking from these spinal taps?
Well, as far as the veterans are concerned, I think that a lot of the private medical research that's currently underway is going to help give us the solution to a lot of these medical problems that the veterans are suffering from. As far as holding officials accountable, in large measure, that's going to be up to the Congress of the United States. The big question that I have right now is, are they going to step up to the plate, issue subpoenas, hold meaningful hearings that will really do something to hold people accountable? Because there have been some criminal acts committed in all of this. Trying to reclassify information is a criminal act. Trying to intimidate veterans into silence, which the Pentagon has done, is a criminal act. That needs to be prosecuted, and the people responsible for it need to go to jail.
I helped stamp and sign close to 1,000 medical records documenting those anthrax vaccines. And in many cases, they're not there now. People have no proof that they ever got those vaccines. And you ask me if there's a cover-up? Nah, no cover-up. Right. It just doesn't make sense to me. Those kinds of things that I saw there as a healthcare provider, I mean, if I tampered with a medical record in the state of Delaware, I could lose my license, go to jail, be civilly sued. I mean, I could be hung out to dry. But somebody else tampers with medical records and it's okay? That just doesn't make sense to me. I personally did those things. I made those databases. I helped do those medical records. And where are they? I don't know. Those are the kinds of things that I saw over there. I know what I did. My memory's not that bad.
The U.S. was a participant in the Geneva Biological Weapons Convention of 1972, and we, as well as Iraq, signed the resultant agreement that prohibited both experimentation with and the sale of biologicals or weapons of mass destruction. Now, obviously, our government has a considerable interest in keeping the U.S. breach of this agreement covered up. Plus, there's the inconvenient fact of our history of cooperation with Saddam Hussein, a tyrant who was denounced by the global community and likened Adolf Hitler. Embarrassment about revealing our past dealings with our current enemy has hampered our government's readiness to deal fairly with veterans.
Once we had begun that investigation, the Pentagon immediately reacted negatively to what we had to say, and although the evidence seemed to be overwhelming that this did occur, the Pentagon began to take an intransigent position. We then started requesting records, logs, documents, and evidence of exports of materials that might indicate U.S. involvement in arming Iraq and that these exposures may have occurred. Over the next 6 months or so, the number of people on the Gulf War Registry from both the veterans community and from the active duty community multiplied almost fivefold. We also started getting responses from the Pentagon indicating that there were no records that indicated that there were any detections of or any exposures to chemical agents. And we knew at that point that they were lying because we had documents in hand that we had gotten from many sources that indicated that these did in fact occur. In fact, there were public press accounts that detections had occurred, that both the Czechs and the French had detected chemical agents, and that many of these agents were being attributed to the fallout from the bombing of the Iraqi chemical weapons research, production, and storage infrastructure. During the committee investigation, we held hearings during which Pentagon officials again deliberately misled Congress under oath about the nature of the exposures that the veterans sustained. And in May of 1994, we actually received a letter from the Secretary of Defense, Health and Human Services, and Department of Veterans Affairs indicating that there was no information, classified or unclassified, indicating any detections of or exposures to chemical agents. We now know that that information was all false and that these people intentionally misled Congress on this issue.
In front of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, General Schwarzkopf publicly stated that he had no knowledge at that time or to the present when he was interviewed by the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee of PFC David Allen Fisher's contamination or injury. This document from the 7th Corps After Action Reports states specifically that yes, he did know And his feeling was, it's only one person, so don't make anything big out of it. There should have been preparations ahead of time, and definitely there should have been a different reaction other than, oh well.
I accept nothing at face value from the DOD, the VA, the CIA, and even the Department of Energy, which really hasn't come before our committee, because they have done nothing to make me feel that when they testify before us, what they say is credible. So I always assume that we're only learning part of the story.
They're rewriting history. That's the bottom line. They're taking what actually occurred and they're making a policy decision. Their policy is, we don't admit it, it doesn't exist. Until DOD admits that it did actually happen, they don't have to do anything about it. The problem that they've got right now is if they admit that those chemical alarms were set off by fallout that made it all the way down to Saudi Arabia, they will have to admit that they messed up on the bombing raids, that their planning totally flopped, that they didn't take into account certain crucial elements that were so basic to the entire thing that it was a no-brainer. They should have known this. And their documentation proves that they actually did know this, they just disregarded it.
The fact is, they underestimated the nature of the threat during the war. They were ill-prepared to deal with the issue of low-level chemical agent fallout. They were ill-prepared to deal with the preventive medicine measures necessary to prevent our soldiers from getting sick as a result of their exposures. And they were ill-prepared to conduct the investigations afterwards. The military is not a good arbiter of the health of American citizens. We have health agencies, we have research institutes, we have foundations and universities that do this kind of research on a daily basis. Our veterans get the leftovers, people with the bureaucratic agendas, people who are trying to defend their past positions, rather than the best available medical science that every other disease in this country gets.
How much longer can the White House, the Pentagon, the Veterans Administration, the CIA, and other agencies responsible for helping these veterans be able to deny the truth?
Here's where you can make a difference. Not on my watch are we going to let something like this happen. Clearly something happened. And to see, in essence, the stonewalling by both the CIA as well as the Pentagon, I give a lot of credit, and I talked to my colleagues, Chris Shays and other Republicans and Democrats helping to lead the charge. We've at least put a foot in the door. And we've gotten them now to admit some things that I don't think a couple years ago they denied. But we have to continue. We can't let them just sweep this thing under the rug.
I feel that the Pentagon should be held responsible, and they should have some criminal war suits against the Pentagon. President Bush, all the generals that exposed the soldiers to these chemicals and toxins without warning us, using a weapon on us without knowing the full effects of it. I really feel that the Pentagon should be held socially responsible to take care of these soldiers and the people that this weapon has affected. And the Iraqi people are suffering from the radioactive material that's still in their land, and someone needs to be socially accountable for cleanup in that country. We've cleaned up foreign countries, we've cleaned up Vietnam, we cleaned up Japan, we helped clean up Germany. Why can't we help clean up Iraq?
I think that there are certain members of the Presidential Advisory Committee who truly do understand that there is a real problem here, not just a medical problem, but a legal and a political problem. And they have tried to have as much of an impact on the process as they can. But this panel has been controlled by a group of individuals who, quite frankly, have sought to try to play down the problem and make the problem go away. It's not going to go away. And in the end, I think that history is going to judge that this panel was just another one of those Washington blue ribbon style panels that administrations use to try to make unpleasant problems go away. But this one will not go away.
The longer that it takes to get the government to properly address this issue, warts and all, the more veterans will die, the more who will become chronically ill. I, for one, would not like to see any grandchild of mine
be sent off to some future war to be subjected to something like this again, where upon returning, their own government doesn't do what it should do.
I sent those soldiers to the Persian Gulf. I voted to confront Saddam Hussein, get him out of Kuwait, not allow him to control nearly 50% of the world's oil, and amass an incredible military machine. I felt very right then when I voted to send our troops there, and I feel right now. But I have this aching heart that the soldiers I sent were not treated properly in terms of their potential exposure, and clearly not treated properly once they came home. And I have a hard time living with that.
We have gotten the VA now to, I think 9 laws from when we started this have been passed to better the veterans' lives. And a landmark decision was when the VA decided to give compensation and pension to undiagnosed illnesses. That had never, ever happened in the history of the VA before, and that was very rewarding for us. It's just been a long road. It's a never-ending road so far. A lot of us cannot see the end of this road, and we don't know if we will see the end of this road. And for many, the end of the road came when they died.
I served proudly. I felt I was serving my country. I felt I was defending my country. I would fight for the American people. I would fight for the human rights. I would fight for freedom, but knowing what the Department of Defense has done to us, I wouldn't fight for the Department of Defense. I feel that the Department of Defense, it's kind of like uses people as guinea pigs in experimentations, and then they don't want to accept any of the responsibility to take care of us.
As I say, this is a transition that is very hard, and I hope I do it with grace.
It's not possible in one program to give you all that we know about a condition as vast and as terrifying and as complex as Gulf War syndrome. But whenever new information is available, we'll uncover it and we'll give it to you. And as you've seen, if you've been watching for any period of time, information that you get each week on this program on AIDS, cancer, arthritis, pain, chronic fatigue syndrome, whatever it is years ahead of the rest of the media. When it can still make a difference, when it can save lives and improve the quality of those who otherwise wouldn't know where to turn. I'm Gary Null. Join me next week as we continue our exploration towards better health.